Okay, imagine this scenario for a second. You're arrested, let's say in a busy public park, broad daylight. And somehow, even though pretty much everyone has a smartphone, not one person takes a photo, no one records a video, it feels, well, unlikely, doesn't it? But that's exactly the kind of situation a recent Supreme Court judgment in Pakistan was looking at. And it led to some really interesting insights. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a significant judicial decision from Pakistan's Supreme Court. Its case is Zahid Sarfaraz Gill versus the state. You'll find it documented as 2024 Scmr 934. Ifrit night. And our mission really is to unpack why digital evidence, video, photos, is becoming so crucial in the justice system, especially in drug cases. We want to look at what this means, the broader implications for society, for law enforcement. How can simple tech sort of address these complex legal issues and, importantly, boost accountability? And just so you know, this deep dive is built entirely from the judgment itself, so it gives us a pretty unique window into how the judiciary is thinking. So let's start with the case itself. Zahid Sarfaraz Gill. How did his specific situation bring all this to the surface? Well, it started with his arrest. He was taken in for narcotics possession. But his lawyer immediately pointed out some, let's say, odd details. It happened at 6 p.m. in May, still daylight, in a popular park. Yeah. But the only witnesses, just the police officers involved. And here's the kicker. None of them, not one, recorded any video or took any photos of the seizure or the arrest itself.
Which is strange, right, in this day and age?
Exactly. So Gill's lawyer argued he was framed, basically falsely implicated. They suggested it was payback, a counterblast, because Gill had filed a complaint against some police officers earlier that same month. The defense even brought forward records they said showed Gill wasn't even at the park when the incident supposedly happened.
So a direct challenge to the police account.
Right. But on the other side, you had the state. Their counsel confirmed, look, we have a chemical report.
Okay.
It shows the substance seized was 1,833 grams of charas. That's a type of cannabis or hashish.
And that quantity is significant.
Very significant. It falls under a section of Pakistan's Control of Narcotic Substances Act that carries a minimum sentence of 9 years, potentially up to 14, plus a fine.
So serious charges.
Definitely. The state's position was simple. He was caught red-handed.
So you have these two completely different stories. And what's really fascinating is how the Supreme Court handled this. You might expect, given the quantity of drugs confirmed by the lab, they'd lean towards the prosecution, at least initially.
Right.
But they didn't. They looked at everything, the context, the lack of independent evidence, the defense claims, and they came out with this observation. The facts and circumstances of the instant case makes it a case of further inquiry.
Further inquiry. That's key, isn't it?
Absolutely. It signals doubt, or at least insufficient proof at that stage. And based on that specific observation, Zahid Sarfaraz Gill was granted bail, set at 100,000 rupees. So it wasn't about deciding guilt or innocence then and there. It was purely about the quality, or maybe the lack of quality, of the evidence presented.
And this is where the case gets bigger than just Mr. Gill, right? The Supreme Court used this as a launchpad.
Precisely. They didn't just stop at granting bail. They zoomed out and asked a fundamental question about how these cases are generally handled, essentially. Why aren't the police using readily available technology?
Yeah, why aren't they just pulling out their phones?
Exactly. Now, the court did acknowledge a specific legal point. Under Pakistan's narcotics law, there's a section 25, that actually removes the requirement from the General Criminal Code, Section 103, to have two respectable local residents witness a search.
Ah, okay. So legally, they don't need civilian witnesses for a drug search like they might for other things.
Correct. So that traditional kind of check isn't mandated there.
But even with that legal allowance, the court seemed genuinely puzzled, didn't they?
Puzzled's a good word, maybe even bewildered. They actually said, and this is a direct quote, "We fail to understand why the police and members of the Anti-Narcotics Force, ANF, do not record or photograph when search, seizure, and/or arrest is made."
It seems so basic.
It does. And what makes it even more striking is that Pakistan's main evidence law, the Qanun-e-Shahada from 1984, already has provisions for this. Article 164 explicitly allows evidence obtained through modern devices or techniques. And Article 155 says that this evidence law overrides other conflicting laws.
So the legal framework is already there. It permits it, even encourages it.
Absolutely. It's not a question of legality. It seems to be, as you said earlier, maybe procedural inertia, or just not doing it.
And the court spelled out the benefits, right? If police or the ANF just use their phone cameras.
Yes, they highlighted how useful that footage or those photos would be. to establish clearly the accused person was there,
Mhm.
that they actually possessed the narcotics, and to show exactly how the search and seizure happened.
And crucially, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? It's not just about convicting people.
That's a really critical point the court made. They explicitly said recordings could also prevent false allegations being leveled against ANF police that the narcotic substance was foisted upon the accused for some ulterior motives.
So accountability for everyone. It protects the police from false claims just as much as it protects citizens from potential misconduct.
Exactly right. Think about the typical scenario in these cases. The witnesses for the prosecution. Usually they are the ANF officers or the police involved in the arrest.
Right. Not many independent eyes.
Very few. And almost all of them government employees. And these officers, I mean, it's 2024, they almost certainly carry smartphones with cameras.
Of course.
So this lack of simple corroborating digital evidence, it creates problems down the line. It leads to these lengthy, drawn-out trials because facts are harder to establish.
And that means more work for the courts.
Definitely. The judgment points this out. It burdens the courts with multiple bail applications. First at the trial level, then often appealed to the high court, and sometimes, like in Gill's case, going all the way up to the Supreme Court. All potentially avoidable with better initial evidence gathering.
Okay, so the court sees a clear problem, a clear solution using existing tech and law. But playing devil's advocate for a moment, could there be practical reasons why officers are hesitant? Maybe worries about data management or chain of custody for digital files, or even safety in a tense arrest situation.
Those are fair questions to raise, and perhaps there are concerns about training, storage protocols, digital forensics capabilities, maybe even, a cultural resistance within some forces to that level of constant recording and transparency. But the court's overall tone suggests that whatever those practical hurdles might be, they don't outweigh the fundamental benefits. The judgment really frames this as an issue of professionalism, public trust, and the basic efficiency of the justice system.
And the societal cost of not doing it effectively.
Absolutely. The court didn't shy away from talking of the devastating impact of narcotics. They were very blunt.
What did they say specifically?
They talked about how drugs destroy lives, people's minds, their health, their ability to work, how it tears families apart, damages the whole fabric of society. There's also the huge financial cost to the state for treating addiction. And the link between addiction and other crimes committed to fund the habit. It's a massive societal burden.
So, given that scale of the problem, the court is saying the institutions responsible need to step up their game.
Precisely. They directly address the ANF and the police, reminding them they're funded by the public purse. Their job is to tackle this menace professionally.
And they didn't stop there, did they? They mentioned the prosecutors, too.
Yes, they also pointed to the prosecution services, again, publicly funded, saying they should be advising the police and ANF to use these simple recording methods to build stronger cases from the start.
So it's a systemic critique. Poor investigations, weak evidence. It harms the prosecution's own case.
Exactly. It leads to trial delays, more court congestion, and ultimately potentially undermines justice. And all of this, the court notes, affects public perception.
Right. If cases drag on or fall apart due to weak evidence, it doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
No, it doesn't. The court basically said it's time for everyone involved, police, ANF, prosecutors, to act professionally and use all the lawful tools they have. Good evidence gathering leads to credible prosecutions, fair adjudication, and ultimately improves the public's trust in the whole system.
It feels like such a straightforward argument in today's world, almost obvious. Yet here we have the Supreme Court needing to spell it out.
It is striking, isn't it, that in an era where we document so much of our lives, this critical interaction, an arrest, often goes undocumented digitally by the authorities involved.
So did the court just make these observations, or did they issue any concrete instructions?
Oh, they took concrete steps. The judgment didn't just stay theoretical. They directed that a copy of their order be sent to the top brass.
Like who specifically?
The Secretary of the Ministry of Narcotics Control, the Director General of the ANF, the Home Secretaries of all the provinces, and the Inspector Generals of Police for all provinces and the Islamabad Capital Territory. Basically, all the key players in law enforcement and drug control policy.
And what were these officials asked to do?
They were specifically directed to consider, the court used that word, consider amending the ANF and police rules.
To do what?
To ensure that video recordings are made or photographs are taken whenever possible during searches, seizures, and arrests. The goal being to properly capture, preserve, and then use that digital evidence effectively in court.
So it's not an immediate mandate, but a very strong nudge from the highest court to get this sorted out.
Exactly. It's putting the ball firmly in their court, asking them to institutionalize this practice.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what we've really seen here is, well, quite a powerful moment. It's the Supreme Court pushing hard for basic modernization, for transparency, for accountability in law enforcement.
Yeah, it really highlights how something as simple as using a phone camera during an arrest isn't just a minor procedural tweak.
No, it can be a total game changer, right? For establishing what actually happened, protecting officers from false claims, protecting citizens from potential overreach, and just making the whole justice process run more smoothly and efficiently.
Definitely. It addresses issues from the street level right up to the highest courts.
So, the final thought for you, listening. What really stands out, think about it, this seemingly small change, just routinely recording arrests and seizures. How could that ripple outwards? How might it affect not just drug cases, but maybe other areas of law enforcement? How could it shift public trust or change the dynamic between citizens and police? It really makes you consider how adapting to readily available technology isn't just about convenience, it can fundamentally alter how justice is perceived and delivered in a country. Something to chew on.